Mr Speaker.
Tracey Martin.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. I'm thrilled to rise on behalf of Team New Zealand First. I think what we've seen here in the House, and the public needs to notice it, that the National Party is still stuck in the first-past-the-post environment. They continue to refer to the opposition this, the opposition that. That is the Labour Party they're talking about. The New Zealand First team is cohesive, we're future-focused, not just in here, but also out there as we climb up the polls. This is a three-way race, this election. Have no doubt, Mr Speaker, this is a three-way race. And New Zealand First, while these two parties are bickering, New Zealand First is getting on with the job. New Zealand First is getting on with talking about and creating education policy that actually works for education, creating economic policy that actually works for our businesses. We're not buying into this back and forward slanging rhetoric. We're actually on the hustings, talking to those businesses, talking to the real life practical solutions that we need to do to make government work for New Zealand. Now, last week I was at Warkworth Primary School. Many other members of Parliament also were asked to walk a day in the shoes of support staff. And I was at Warkworth Primary School. I find it fascinating, and Ms Dowie just remarked that there's now another $34.7 million somewhere that this government pulled out of a bucket after cutting in 2009 all the specialist support staff for schools because they wanted to put in national standards. You may not know this, Ms Dowie, that's all right. You may not know what's actually happened, but in 2009 your government cut the funding, and now the failures are showing. They left children out there. We've got a little 5-year-old at Warkworth Primary School who's got type 1 diabetes. He gets funded by your government for 21 hours. He's at school for 30 hours. He'll go into a diabetic coma if he's not monitored all the time, but somehow, Ms Dowie, your government believes it's appropriate to fund him for only 21 hours. Your government has no idea what it's doing. And the $11 billion is for property, Ms Dowie, and charter schools. $1 million, $900,000 taken by the sponsors of Vanguard and given to a private company. How do you justify that, Ms Dowie? You make statements, platitudes inside this House while knowing nothing, while walking around and swallowing the rhetoric that Mrs Kay and Ms Parati feed you. Invest in your own education, Ms Dowie. Invest in your own education. Because that's what New Zealand First will be doing, Mr Speaker. Let's talk about the intensive wraparound service that this government says, and Ms Parata stood up in this House and said there is nobody on the waiting list for the intensive wraparound service. What she neglected to tell the Parliament and the people of New Zealand was that actually, at the beginning of this year, the intensive wraparound service sent a message out to all the schools in New Zealand and said, there's no more room, don't apply. So there's no waiting list because there's no more room, don't apply. Now that's a little piece of information the New Zealand public should know. And the reason why this government decided to reach into this bucket over here that suddenly it's magically got all this money in, even though it has said for decades now, almost a decade now, that there's no more money, they reached into this bucket because parents came to Select Committee and said, with their special needs children, the system is failing. The government said we're not putting any more money into it. And those members over there know because they articulated that statement. The government's putting no more money into it. Suddenly, there's an uproar and parents got up on their feet and started to make noise. And suddenly this government found $34 million. We had Pat Newman up in Northland making a call to newspapers because we've got children with knives and threatening to kill themselves and others, and this government originally said call the police. Now they found some money. But isn't that a shame? The polling, Mr Speaker, the polling. I say to the New Zealand public, New Zealand First is the cohesive team that you need for the 2017 election. We will lead this government after the 23rd of September. So keep coming to us, the voters of New Zealand, keep coming to us, look to our policies, talk to our people, because both of these parties have let you down.
Todd Muller.
Thank you, Mr.